The Thing Across the Road. I've been reading stories on this website for several years now, but today, I finally decided to sign up and share one of my own stories. I've had a few occurrences in my life that I couldn't explain, and I'll probably post them later. This account happened around 1995, when I was 13 or 14. I grew up in Evans City, about 40 minutes north of Pittsburgh, where some of you might know is where The Night of the Living Dead was filmed back in 1968, which really has nothing to do with my story. So anyways, my family had a fairly long 300 feet driveway. Halfway down the driveway is where we kept the garbage bags, and every Tuesday morning was when garbage was picked up. My job on Monday night was to gather up the garbage from the kitchen and bathrooms, take it to the cans, and take the cans to the road. So, I was dragging the cans down my driveway at maybe around 10 at night, like usual. When I started getting close to the road, it was about 20 feet. I noticed some kind of animal. Also, as a side note, my road didn't have any street lights or anything. The only light at this time was from the garage light, which was 300 feet up from my driveway. So, this animal appeared to be eating something in the ditch on the other side of the road, directly across from my driveway. We had a gravel driveway, and it was very loud, dragging an 80-pound garbage can down it. I figured it would run away as soon as I got close. It looked like it was picking something up and placing it in its mouth. I dropped the cans off at the road, and then it looked at me. I was about 12 feet away from this thing. I stared at it, and it stared back. I froze, and it froze. A hairless black monkey with no face, or a skinny, long-armed 3-year-old in a black bodysuit is the only way I can describe this creature. It was staring at me, yet it had no eyes. It was eating, yet it had no mouth. This creature was dark black, darker than anything around it. We stared at each other for about 5 seconds, until I realized this is no possum, skunk, raccoon, or groundhog. It felt like it wanted me to go to it, while also having a runaway or you're dead vibe. I felt my chest tighten and my eyes water, and I ran back to my house and didn't look back. I ran into my room and finally looked out the window, but it was too dark and far away to make out anything down there, and I never did garbage again. So, what do you guys think of this? I've been wondering for 16 years. Thanks. Bigfoot thing. Okay, so now that I've gone to my desktop. So as a teenager, my friends and I used to do all sorts of stupid things to try to scare each other, or to try and contact spirits and ghosts and whatnot. If we saw it on TV, we tried to find it, or summon it to say the least. Yeah, the typical just fucking around kind of things teenagers do. So one night, we were out on my friend's pool deck behind his house. He has his 1-acre plot behind his place that is a small field. The grass was only grown up maybe a foot, because it was getting into spring, and the snow had been gone maybe a month. We were just goofing off out back, and he was trying to spook my sister and I that he saw a Bigfoot out back in the field. He said his mom saw it, and had his whole elaborate story about how it was just chilling on his garden bench in his yard. After a while, he brought us down into the yard, and it was really dark by this time, just to show us where he had seen it, and to sit in the bench and reenact the way this Bigfoot creature was sitting on this bench. We get down there, and he's showing us this, when we start to hear movement in the grass a little ways out. We were a little spooked out because he was trying to scare us with a Bigfoot thing, but we all decided it was probably his cat Kit, so we started calling to the cat, and the movement stopped. We brushed it off and went back up onto the back deck, and there is his cat at the back sliding door, just sitting there watching us. I got a little bit nervous, but then just laughed it off and said it was probably the neighbor's cat, which would explain why it didn't come over to us. We sat a bit and chatted for a while, but then my sister and I decided that we were going home because it was getting really late and we didn't want to get in trouble. Just as we were getting up from the patio chairs, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye at the grass line near a skinny tree. I froze seeing as I was already paranoid, and I got their attention. At first, they didn't see it until it moved, and you could see the gleam off its eyes from the deck light. At first, my sister thought it was a cat or a raccoon or something ducking in the grass, but as we all moved more to pick up and go inside, it slowly moved along the grass line. I hurried them to look, and there was another one coming out from behind another group of trees, and the one in the foreground of the grass, you could tell it wasn't a cat. It was hunched down, but it didn't have cat-like ears or a tail. It did have a tail, though. It was thin. The thing was on the size of a cat, though, but looked more like a reptile, but not really reptilian either. It was really hard to explain. The closest to a photo I've ever even seen of this is where there was a couple, I think it was a wedding photo, under a tree, and the demon was in the tree. It actually reminds me of the popular Jersey Devil photo, but not really since mine didn't have ears or wings. Howling shadows. There are many times in my life that I just get a feeling. I don't mean that I have premonitions or experiences, I just mean to say that I have gut feelings. I'm sure that it's a universal thing. Just imagine the feeling of falling on a roller coaster mixed with a car crash. That's the closest I can describe it. These feelings usually come before something unpleasant happens. The most vivid memory I have of this is right before my previous story concerning a Ouija board, and the most recent is before the birth of my nieces. My sister-in-law had extreme difficulty in labor, and we almost lost all three of them. My parents, who are disbelieving in certain phenomenon, believe that I suffer from acid reflux and had me examined and medicated for what they believe to be acid reflux and anxiety. However, I truly believe that though I am not in any way whatsoever special, I have the common sense to follow my gut and listen to what my body tells me. Recently, I moved out of my old residence into a home that is a great distance away from my family and friends. This area is a new life experience, and I am well aware that stress will do strange things to your body, but there's a difference between stress and the activity going on in my home and life. I moved into a home that has a long history, not a dark or mysterious history, just a long-standing life. The research I've done on my home revealed that there was one human death on the residence, that of an older woman who passed away in her sleep after living a long, healthy life. There was also a period in which a woman hoarded numerous animals on the residence, though she kept them in relative health and comfortable conditions. This is how I came upon the home. The price had dropped from her housing conditions from the amount of animals. Besides the history, the home is not located near any burial grounds or churches or rivers. It is located at the end of a neighborhood road in the middle of a small town. All in all, I cannot find any reasoning behind the things going on in my home other than overreacting or hopefully stress, though the feeling that I have in my gut tells me otherwise. To get on with it, I've had shadows, sounds, smells, and a strange animal taking place on the ground of my home. I started noticing these things after my dogs started acting strange. Both of them are older rescue dogs. Cardamom, a massive shaggy mixed breed who was abused as a pup, and because of this his death, and Damiana, a large pit bull mix, who was a rescue bait dog. Both usually lays about and love to just cuddle or beg for treats. I've been living in my home for about 6 months, and had my dogs for about a year, so I know what their usual behavior consists of. But recently, they started to act protective and almost aggressive at certain times. At first, Cardamom would just follow me wherever I went, despite his hip issues. I played it off as him wanting to be let out or asking for food, but he refused to eat or go outside. He just wanted to be near me. Then, my other dog started standing guard wherever I went. She walked in front of me and sat next to me, putting herself between doors and myself. Both of them had become anxious when I went into the dining room, which had 2 double glass doors that led out into the backyard that leads down into a wooded area. I usually never enter the room unless I have company, and when I'm cleaning, Lately, if I even go near my other dog, they'll stand up still and refuse to let me enter, or just howl or whimper. At first, I put aside my worry and just played it off as weird behavior from dogs that I was becoming accustomed to. Both were almost 7 years old, and I'd only spent a year with them. Then, I started noticing a smell on the side of my house that was near the backyard, the dining room, kitchen, family room, restroom, and garage. The smell isn't a bad one per se. It just smells as if I've left the windows open and the wood area has wafted in. It usually just smells like decaying leaves. Again, not necessarily bad. Wood sap and something else. Honestly, it smells like an air freshener. The smell is just disconcerting because for the longest time, I believed that windows were left open or there was something wrong with the walls or insulation, allowing cool air to get in and hot air out, increasing my bills. It was only once or twice that the smell became overpowering and almost acrid that it will come later. Along with the smell came sounds that I cannot identify. At first, it was scratching at the double doors, leading towards the back. I came to see if the dogs needed to be let out. Usually, I would see them both before I even came close to the doors, so I would assume that it was debris catching on the doors. Then, I began to suspect raccoons may be making a ruckus and getting into things. But there was never any evidence of raccoons. Still, the scratching continued, and then, added to it, came a whimper at times. Usually the whimper sounded late at night, when I was about to go to bed and brushing my teeth in my adjoining bathroom, and the dogs were already choosing which area of my bed to lay claim to. I thought it might have been one of my other dogs asking for help onto my bed, but whenever I went in, both dogs would just look at me, and I caught on to the fact that it wasn't them. The sound stopped when I left my room, and it only ever started when I was about to go to sleep. There were moments when I would just faintly hear something. Once, it sounded like a strange grunting, then thunking like a heavy ball, and another sounded like a low groan that went on for a while. But both were inside of my home with no locatable sources. I never really had my feeling until I started noticing a shadow in my house. Both of my dogs would always be around me, so I knew it could not have been them. At first, I just caught it out of the corner of my eye, outside of the living room window. It was usually a hunched up mass about the size of a large dog, and when I turned to look at it, the shadow wouldn't be there. Neither dog seemed to react to it, so I just put it from my mind. It wasn't until I started to see it out by the woods that I became concerned. It would hover by the tree ledge and stand there, so I honestly just believed it to be an animal or maybe a stray dog. The first great feeling I had was when I walked into the dining room and opened the door to call to it. I always found stray animals when I was younger, so I thought to see if I could get it closer to return it or maybe startle it off if it was a wild. When I pushed against the door to enter my backyard, I felt my stomach clench. It was as if I was staring at a semi-truck coming straight at me and I couldn't move. The shadow seemed to turn towards me and hunch up into itself. My hand was frozen at the point of the door, and I didn't have the strength to close it, like my arm was full of water and unable to do anything but stay where it was. There was this sudden silence as I looked at the shadow thing, and it wasn't until my dog howled that I slammed the door shut hard enough that it rattled the glass panes. My dog seemed to push against my legs and tried to maneuver me out of the room, but I couldn't look away from the tree line and the shadow thing. I think I may have stumbled on the carpet, because the next thing I knew I was flat on my butt, with my dog standing over my torso and her hackles straight up and growling like I never heard her. When I managed to wiggle out from under her and I stood up, I called to her and tried to get away from the door, but she refused. She refused to move. I finally grabbed her by her collar and pulled her out of the room. When I hauled her out of the room, I hurried to the phone and called a local animal shelter and their officers to report a possible wild dog of large size. I told the officer what I had seen and heard, a large black or dark-colored dog, relative to the size of a Great Dane, with a great deal of hair, who was by the woods in my backyard, and I was apprehensive about approaching because my own dog's reaction to this animal. I waited for the officers to come and sit with my dogs, loving on them and trying to calm us all down from what had just happened, especially me. My stomach refused to unclench. Within the hour, I had 2 officers come out and take my statement. Both of my dogs were fawning over the visitors and loving the added attention. The men said they would check out the area and see what they could find. I told them that the woods was only half a mile wide and adjoined my neighborhood to an elementary school, and children constantly took it as a shortcut home. The men took what I said seriously and started off into my backyard. When they came to the edge between the woods and my yard, both of my dogs started to become nervous wrecks, drooling, whimpering, and stalking out the area between my kitchen and the dining room. The officers were out there for almost 3 hours until it became dusky and their flashlights would be of little use in the dark. They came around to the house again near the front door and rang the bell. Usually the dogs will rush to the door even when they know who it is, but this time they came cautiously, and when the men tried to enter, both started to growl at the officers. It surprised me greatly to see the turnaround in their attitude to the men. They had been rolling over before to have their stomachs scratched by these same men. Now, they sounded like they were ready for an attack. Even the officers seemed surprised, so instead of coming inside, I went out. And my dogs went ballistic. Although I was just right outside, the officers had to yell over the noise to tell me that they didn't find any animal matching my description, but they had found dog tracks near my house, but that the animal could have been passing by, but they would inform the neighbors and schools to look for a stray dog. They informed me that a fence might help ease the tension, and that if I saw it again to call them immediately. They left, and I re-entered my house to be pushed down and reacquainted with my dogs. It was about 3 months later. The fences had been put up since then, and I was going out on a morning walk with my dogs. My sister-in-law and 2 nieces had come over for a visit, so I left a note telling them I'd be gone for a while, and I had my phone with me. Although I didn't believe they would need me, it was close to 4 in the morning. We went in the opposite direction of the woods, and it was about 45 minutes later, my gut went cold, and I received a frantic call from my sister-in-law. Her 2 girls had woken up screaming, not crying, just screaming. They had been placed in the family room because that was the largest place for their cribs, and when my sister-in-law rushed in, she saw a big friggin' dog staring into the window from the backyard inside of the fence. Later, she told me that when she looked at the thing that she was afraid, no reason for it, but just primarily afraid. It took her a while, but she threw a blanket at the window, and then the dog disappeared. By the end of the call, I already made a good track back to the house, but when we reached the block, my 2 dogs almost took out my arms by just pulling me home. Inside, my sister-in-law had all the windows covered and every door locked. The girls had quieted down, but the smell was back, stronger than it had ever been. It was acrid, like it was spoiled. One of the dogs had gone to the window the dog was at. No one had told her which window it was, and just paced back with hackles raised and tail straight up. My other dog had gone to the trio and was snuffing the girls and my sister-in-law and would not stop and licked them at random intervals. Once I was assured everyone was fine, I called animal control and demanded that someone come out now. Again, they searched to no avail, but they could not figure out how something had cleared the 7-foot fence, unless the dog was simply that massive. Not necessarily reassuring, but a good-to-know fact. My family left soon after. My sister-in-law was just so uncomfortable that she would jump at a door shutting too quickly. I was lately informed that things had started to occur with her and the twins, but that's another tale altogether. Since that day, I still have the strange behavior of both of my dogs, but with a reinforced fence and safety precautions, it's eased a lot of tension and abnormalities. I have since then rescued another dog who also seems to dislike the woods behind my house. She also guards me and will join my other cats on stalking patrol, but otherwise shows no strange behavior. I still have the woodsy smell in my house, and I can hear the whimper occasionally, but the shadow has not reappeared, and the strange animal has not made an encore performance. I occasionally have the gut feeling when walking home or anywhere near the wooded area, but I have yet to feel afraid. There was only one more time that heard of the animal showing up. My neighbor has 2 children who are students at the school behind the woods, and they were reported to their mother a strange occurrence. They were approaching my yard, and they heard something walking towards them. They said it sounded like a large animal, so they assumed that it was one of mine. However, when they turned around, all they saw was a large dark dog with yellow eyes, like it was looking at them sideways, and they took off running only to have the animal follow them to the fence. Their mother said they were extremely frightened after the experience and demanded to know why my dog had bothered them. I pointed out to her that my dogs are all light-colored animals who are either too afraid of children or are physically incapable of chasing the boys. She had to coincide to my point after she saw my dogs. I informed her of the issue I was having with a similar animal, and we left it at that, though I did inform her that I had notified animal control and the school of the issue, just so she understood and wouldn't further blame my animals. There is still some apprehension over the strange animal, but I can deal with it, and I still have to walk away from the woods with my dogs in tow. Otherwise, they seem to want to stalk the woodline. I honestly hope that what I describe is just a strange occurrence of a wild animal coming too close to society, but my dog's reactions thereafter, somewhere deep down though, I still feel a little uneasy when I think about what happened. I can't logically explain the occurrence, the smell just being downwind of the area, the sounds being from my dogs or otherwise normal animal behavior, the shadow my imagination, and the strange menacing shadow animal just a menacing animal. I just cannot shake my gut feeling of this though, and until something happens to the contrary, I will hold on to my gut and keep an eye open. Maybe someone here can put my fears to rest or explain it? Well, thank you for your time and anything you have to offer.